Hello everyone and welcome back. As usual, we are going to be defining in these lessons the NgRx actions that we are going to need for implement a given feature. Let's go over the feature. What we want to do is whenever we load this page for the first time, we want to be able to load the first page of lessons and display it here to the user. The page of lessons is then going to be saved in memory in the store. Next, if we paginate here to another page of lessons, we also want to get that page from the backend. There is no need to fetch that ahead of time. We also want to save that in the store. Now, whenever we go back here to the same page that we just loaded a moment ago, then at that moment we don't want to hit the server again and fetch the exact same data, showing again the same loading indicator to the user. Instead, we want to fetch the data directly from the in-memory store without having to contact the server. This is going to give the user a much better user experience. Let's then go ahead and define the actions that we're going to need. We are going to define here the action types strings for each action. I'm going to paste the actions one by one and we're going to review it together so that we can focus on the explanation of each action and not the typing. So here we have the first action that we're going to need, which is called lessons page requested. So as we can see, we are not fetching the lessons entity in bulk. Instead, we are fetching it page by page. It's a paginated NgRx entity. Now here, the source for the lessons page requested action is going to be this page that you see here on the screen. This is going to be the course landing page. And again, it's important to make this source of the action as clear as possible so that we can identify where the action is being triggered without having to look at much source code. Next, we are going to enter here the event linked to the action, which is a lessons page was requested. Okay, so now we have defined our first action for this feature. Let's go ahead and add here the corresponding action that is going to be triggered when the lessons page is loaded from the server. So as usual, we are going to be calling this lessons page loaded action. The source is the courses API, the REST API that we are using to contact the server, and the event is lessons page loaded. Now, whenever the lessons page is being fetched from the server, we still want to show a loading indicator to the user. So the use of NgRx in an application does not completely eliminate the need for loading indicators. It simply reduces a lot the need for using them. So we are going to show here a loading indicator to the user, but when we get the page of lessons from the backend, then we want to hide that loading indicator. There's a problem though. What happens if there is an error on the server processing this request here? In that case, we want to still hide the loading indicator from the user. We don't want to leave here a spinner running indefinitely, giving the impression to the user that the data will eventually arrive. Instead, we want to do some concrete action in response to a failed HTTP request. So in order to do that, we are going to need a third action that is going to be called the lessons page cancelled action. So again, the source for this is the courses API and the event is lessons page cancelled. And with this, we have identified the three actions that we're going to be needing to implement this new NgRx feature. Let's now define our first action class, which is going to be lessons page requested. So as usual, this is going to be a class that is going to implement the action interface. We're going to add here the read-only type, and we are going to assign it to the course action types lessons page requested. Now let's design the payload for this action. Here in the constructor, this action is going to receive here an object that we are going to be calling payload as usual, and the payload is going to include, to start, the identifier of the course for which we want to load a page of lessons, and we also need to define here some data about the page that we want to load. We want to somehow define what is the page, if it's the first page, the second page, etc., and what is the intended page size. So we need to pass in here a new page query type that we are about to define. We're going to define it here directly in this file. Let's then define this new type. So it's going to be named page query, and it's going to have a couple of properties. So the first property is the page index, and the second property is going to be the page size, both numbers. And with this we have defined lessons page requested. Let's now define lessons page loaded. We will need a new class that also implements the action interface as usual. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in here the definition of the type. So this is identical to the other actions that we have implemented. We are going to assign here the type to lessons page loaded. Now the important part of the action is going to be here the definition of the payload that goes here in the constructor. So this time around, this action is going to be triggered whenever we already got a page of lessons from the backend. So we are going to get here in the payload an array of lessons. This is going to be our page that we are going to store in our in-memory store. Now we are only missing here the lessons page cancelled action, so let's now define it. This action is not going to have any particular payload, so I'm going to implement it by pasting here the definition of the action. So as we can see, it simply has here the read-only type and no constructor is needed for this action. The final step for defining the actions of this feature is to take the name of each action, and we are going to add it here in our course actions enum type. And with this we have defined here the 3 actions that we are going to be needing in this new section. The next thing that we are going to do is we are going to be adding a new NgRx entity to our application. It's going to be the lesson entity.